He believed he could fly and touch the sky, and he thought about it every night and day, spreading his wings and flying away. Well, R. Kelly was right about some things. His career did skyrocket to new heights, but his recent fall from grace has dropped him right back down to earth. So stay tuned and don't go away, because R. Kelly has been ordered to pay his victim $300K and other related news. First up, how do you go from Grammy-winning artist to serving a life sentence? Just ask R. Kelly. Kelly is not only going to prison for a slew of sex crimes in New York State. Kelly's punishments also include being ordered to pay small fortunes to some of his victims. The troubled former pop star is also on the hook financially for treatments related to his victims' STDs and the psychological trauma they've suffered as a result. Recently, at a restitution proceeding in a Brooklyn court, a judge ruled that Kelly will have to fork over cash to some of his victims, in addition to the decades in prison he'll have to endure. Court records show that one of Kelly's victims, who we'll call Jane, would be receiving roughly $300K to cover her herpes treatments and psychiatric care as a result of Kelly's actions. Another victim, we'll call her Stephanie, is also in line to receive funds from Kelly as well, although Stephanie's matter before the courts is still ongoing and yet to be resolved. Kelly is already facing a 30-year prison sentence for federal sex offenses. More recently, Kelly was convicted in a federal case out of Chicago where he was accused of additional sex crimes similar to those out of New York, and he'll likely have to pay restitution in the Chicago cases too. It remains anyone's guess if Kelly's victims will ever see a dime, though, because according to official court filings, the Grammy-winning artist claims that he's broke. Next up, which other famous musicians have spent time in jail? You're about to find out. The famous West Coast rapper Tupac Shakur spent his share of time inside prison walls. The legendary lyrical poet was the subject of various drug busts in addition to a number of unrelated charges. After spending time in prison, Tupac did straighten up a bit, but he was often surrounded by career criminals in his entourage. However, in 1995, Tupac was charged with sexual assault, but he was shot 5 times the day before the verdict was announced and forced to enter the courtroom in a wheelchair. While in prison, Tupac got married and released his album Me Against the World and became the only person to ever have a #1 album while incarcerated. Death Records CEO Suge Knight eventually posted $1.4 million bail for Tupac in October 1995 in exchange for Tupac recording 3 albums for Death Row. For the sexual assault charge, Tupac served 11 months of a 1.5 to 4.5 year prison sentence. Grammy-winning musician Lauryn Hill has also spent time in prison. However, her crimes were vastly dissimilar to Tupac's. Hill's crimes were what is often referred to as white-collar crimes. Following her conviction for failing to pay federal income taxes, Hill was sentenced to 3 months in a low-security, all-female facility in Danbury, Connecticut. Up next, what do Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols and John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas have in common? They both serve prison time. Famed punk legend Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols spent time in prison. On the morning of October 12, 1978, Vicious claimed that he woke up from a drugged-out haze to find Nancy Spungen, his longtime girlfriend, dead on the bathroom floor of their room in Manhattan, New York's Hotel Chelsea. Nancy suffered a single stab wound to her abdomen and subsequently bled to death. Charged with Nancy's murder, Vicious later said, "I stabbed her, but I never meant to kill her." Vicious was arrested on December 9, 1978 and sent to Rikers Island. Vicious spent 59 days in jail and was released on bail on February 1, 1979. The following day, Sid Vicious died of a drug overdose. The star behind such hit songs as California Dreamin' and Monday Monday, John Papa Phillips, the founder of the Mamas and the Papas, served 1 month of a potentially 8-year prison term for faking drug prescriptions with the assistance of a local pharmacist. Famed music producer Phil Spector, who worked with the Beatles, is currently serving a hard time for shooting hostess and actor Lana Clarkson back in 2003. Spector claimed that Clarkson's death was an accidental suicide and that she kissed the gun. However, everyone who knew Spector was well aware of his erratic, threatening behavior and his love for firearms. Phil Spector died on January 16, 2021 at the age of 81 due to complications stemming from COVID-19. Stay tuned and don't go away, because we're looking at more famous musicians who have spent time in prison. Next up, which famous musicians spent their fair share of time inside a prison? You're about to find out. Famous American rapper Lil Wayne is no stranger to finding himself on the wrong side of the law. Over the years, Wayne has received weapons charges as well as charges for various drug-related offenses. Those weapons charges had him sent to New York's Rikers Island for 8 months of a 12-month sentence. Moving on now to another famous musician who just couldn't keep his nose clean, Chuck Berry. When I was a kid, I loved Chuck Berry's music, and only recently did I learn that Chuck Berry was also a part-time criminal who spent time inside for armed robbery, and when he was at the height of his career, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for inviting a 14-year-old Mexican girl across the border to the U.S. to work for him. Berry Harry served a total of 24 months of his sentence. The famed Norwegian drummer Faust was a member of the black metal band Emperor, and he was charged with the murder of a gay man who approached him in a park. Faust stabbed the man 37 times and served 9 years and 4 months of a 14-year sentence. Up next, have you ever heard of the sad and twisted story of Big Lurch? Let's find out. No, we're not talking about the Lurch from the Addams Family. We're talking about Big Lurch, a Texas-based rapper who, at just 24 years old, was hit by a car and broke his neck. Unfortunately, to deal with the pain, Big Lurch took a ton of PCP, and that led him to suffer a psychotic break. Back in 2002, Big Lurch murdered his 21-year-old roommate and ate her liver. Big Lurch, whose real name is Antron Singleton, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Moving on now to another famous musician who couldn't keep himself out of jail, Canadian reggae musician Snow. Snow, whose real name is Darren Kenneth O'Brien, was born in Toronto and is best known for his 1992 hit track Informer, a song based on a 1989 incident in which he was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. Following his parents' divorce, Snow was raised in a public housing project, became fascinated with the gangster lifestyle, and became involved in a vicious cycle of fighting, drinking, and stealing. In the 1989 incident, Snow was detained for a year in Toronto before the charges were reduced to aggravated assault. Eventually, Snow was acquitted and freed, but he served a total of 12 months in prison. Next up, whatever happened to David Crosby? Let's take a look. David Crosby is a famous musician who founded the bands The Byrds and Crosby, Stills and Nash. Crosby has also toured with Pink Floyd's David Gilmour as well. In 1982, however, the accomplished musician ran into a few legal problems in the state of Texas. Crosby faced drug and weapons charges and spent a total of 9 months in Texas prisons. The drug charges stemmed from Crosby possessing significant amounts of heroin and cocaine. Crosby is far from the only legendary musician to run afoul of the law. On May 16, 1947, famed musician Billie Holiday was arrested for the possession of narcotics in her New York apartment. When her trial concluded, Holiday was sentenced to Alderson Federal Prison Camp in West Virginia, where she enjoyed the facility's southern hospitality for a total of 10 months. Famous singer Tina Turner's husband, Ike Turner, was no stranger to prison either. In January of 1987, Turner was arrested for trying to sell cocaine to an undercover police officer. In the end, Turner pled guilty to conspiring to sell the drug, but not guilty to counts of possessing cocaine for sale, conspiring to sell the drug, and maintaining a residence for the purpose of selling cocaine. Turner spent a total of 4 years in prison for conspiring to sell cocaine. Finally, did Paul McCartney ever serve time in prison? Surely a man of stature such as Paul McCartney, the founding member of the most famous band in the world, would never do anything to land himself behind bars. Well, if you believe that, you'd be wrong. You see, despite being personally knighted by Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace in 1997, Sir Paul McCartney hasn't always been squeaky clean. McCartney once spent 10 days in a Japanese prison after customs agents at the Tokyo airport found 7.7 ounces of marijuana in his luggage. Luckily, McCartney was able to avoid a 7-year prison sentence, and after serving 10 days, he was swiftly deported from Japan. That's a wrap for today's video. Thank you for watching.